If you measure tornadoes by wind speed, the strongest storms are terrifying. But if you measure them by lives lost, the story changes. The deadliest U.S. tornadoes weren't just violent, they hit the wrong place, at the worst time, with too little warning. This is the history of America's most lethal tornadoes, counted by fatalities. Level 0, Flint, Beecher, Michigan, June 8, 1953, 116 deaths. By early evening on June 8, 1953, the atmosphere over eastern Michigan had become unstable in a way most residents didn't recognize as dangerous. Warm, humid air had surged northward, colliding with cooler air aloft. Severe thunderstorms erupted across the region, but few people anticipated what would follow. Around 8:30 p.m., a violent tornado developed near Flint and tracked through the Beecher district. It would later be rated F5. The tornado struck residential neighborhoods directly, destroying hundreds of homes in minutes. Entire blocks were leveled. Wood frame houses disintegrated, leaving little survivable space inside. The timing proved catastrophic. The tornado struck during the evening when families were at home. Television ownership was still limited in many households, and modern warning dissemination systems did not yet exist. Although severe weather forecasts had been issued earlier in the day, the public warning infrastructure of the early 1950s was rudimentary compared to today's standards. In Beecher, some homes were swept completely from their foundations. Survivors described scenes of total structural failure. Walls collapsing outward, roofs torn free instantly, debris scattered for miles. Emergency responders faced blocked roads, damaged communication lines, and overwhelmed hospitals. When the storm cleared, 116 people were confirmed dead. Hundreds more were injured. The Beecher tornado became one of the deadliest single tornadoes in Michigan history and a defining disaster for the region. It also exposed the vulnerability of densely populated residential zones when struck directly by violent tornadic winds. Level 1, New Richmond, Wisconsin, June 12, 1899, 117 deaths. In the late afternoon of June 12, 1899, residents of New Richmond, Wisconsin noticed dark, turbulent skies building to the southwest. Severe thunderstorms were not unusual in early summer. What was unusual was the scale of destruction that was about to unfold. A powerful tornado formed and moved directly toward town. Witness accounts describe a massive funnel advancing with a roar compared to an oncoming freight train. Within minutes, it struck the center of New Richmond. The tornado devastated the town's commercial district first. Brick buildings collapsed as upper stories pancaked onto the streets below. Wooden homes were torn apart. Debris became lethal projectiles carried hundreds of yards. Entire sections of town were reduced to splinters. In 1899, there was no organized tornado warning system. Residents relied on sight and instinct. By the time the tornado became visible, escape options were limited. Many people sought shelter in basements, but structural collapses often buried those spaces under debris. The destruction extended beyond the town into the surrounding rural areas. Farms were leveled, livestock was killed, trees were stripped bare. Official reports recorded 117 fatalities. Though record-keeping at the time was imperfect, hundreds more were injured. Rescue operations were immediate but improvised, neighbors digging through wreckage by hand. Physicians traveling from nearby towns by horse and carriage. New Richmond was nearly erased in less than 10 minutes. The town was rebuilt, but the event remains one of the deadliest tornadoes in Wisconsin history. Level 2, Amite, Louisiana/Purvis, Mississippi, April 24, 1908, 143 deaths. On April 24, 1908, a violent tornado carved a path through parts of Louisiana and Mississippi, devastating the towns of Amite and Purvis. The storm developed during a regional outbreak that produced multiple tornadoes across the Deep South. The tornado struck rural and small-town communities directly. Homes, churches, and schools were destroyed. Entire neighborhoods collapsed under extreme winds. In many areas, structures were completely removed from their foundations. The fatality count reached 143, making it one of the deadliest tornadoes in the southern United States during the early 20th century. Many victims were inside wooden homes that offered little resistance to violent winds. In 1908, building construction standards did not account for tornado forces. Most houses were not anchored securely to foundations. When winds intensified, structures failed rapidly. The communication infrastructure was minimal. Telegraph lines were down, roads became impassable due to debris and fallen trees. Medical care relied on nearby towns sending assistance by rail or carriage. Eyewitnesses described entire communities flattened in minutes. Survivors emerged to find landmarks gone, streets unrecognizable, buildings replaced by piles of timber. The Amite Purvis tornado demonstrated the heightened vulnerability of rural southern communities in an era without advance warning or engineered shelter. Level 3, Joplin, Missouri, May 22, 2011, 158 to 161 deaths. On May 22, 2011, a violent EF5 tornado struck Joplin, Missouri. Although its death toll was lower than some earlier events on this list, it became the deadliest single tornado in the United States since modern record-keeping began in 1950. The tornado formed during the late afternoon and intensified rapidly as it approached the city. When it entered Joplin, it widened and strengthened, tearing through residential neighborhoods, commercial corridors, and critical infrastructure. Entire subdivisions were flattened, schools were destroyed. St. John's Regional Medical Center sustained catastrophic damage, forcing the evacuation of patients amid ongoing rescue efforts. The official fatality count ranges between 158 and 161, depending on reporting sources. Over 1,000 people were injured. Unlike 19th-century disasters, Joplin occurred in the era of Doppler radar, emergency alerts, and established warning systems. Sirens were activated. Forecasts had highlighted the risk of severe weather. Yet the storm's rapid intensification and direct strike on populated areas led to devastating consequences. The tornado's winds were strong enough to sweep homes from their foundations and deform large commercial buildings. Vehicles were thrown significant distances. Entire blocks were reduced to debris fields. The path through Joplin was approximately 1 mile wide in places. Damage extended across nearly a third of the city. The scale of destruction was visible from aerial imagery, revealing a continuous corridor of devastation. Joplin stands as a modern reminder that even with advanced forecasting and communication, violent tornadoes striking urban areas can still produce catastrophic loss of life. Level 4, Woodward, Oklahoma, April 9, 1947, 181 deaths. On the evening of April 9, 1947, a massive tornado struck Woodward, Oklahoma, part of a larger outbreak that impacted the southern plains. Woodward lay directly in the storm's path. The tornado entered the town after dark, reducing visibility and limiting reaction time. As it moved through residential neighborhoods, homes were flattened, some swept from their foundations entirely. The tornado killed 181 people, making it one of the deadliest in Oklahoma history. In 1947, the science of tornado detection was still developing. Although weather forecasting had improved since the early 1900s, real-time warning systems were limited. Radar networks were not yet widespread. Many residents had little or no warning before the tornado struck. Eyewitnesses described the tornado as a massive dark presence accompanied by a deafening roar. Survivors recounted buildings collapsing within seconds and debris flying horizontally through the air. Woodward's infrastructure suffered severe damage. Utilities were knocked out. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Rescue operations extended for days as teams searched through the wreckage for survivors and victims. The event reinforced the vulnerability of plains communities during nighttime tornadoes. With reduced visibility and limited warning dissemination, even towns familiar with severe weather faced devastating losses. Level 5, Gainesville, Georgia, April 6, 1936, 203 deaths. Less than 24 hours after the Tupelo disaster, another violent tornado formed, this time targeting the city of Gainesville, Georgia. The date was April 6, 1936. The tornado struck during the morning hours as businesses were open and the downtown district was active. Unlike many rural tornado catastrophes, this one tore directly through the commercial heart of the city. Brick buildings collapsed inward onto crowded streets. Multi-story structures failed under extreme winds, trapping workers and shoppers beneath debris. Fires ignited in the wreckage, fueled by broken gas lines and scattered flammable materials. Smoke rose from multiple blocks simultaneously. The tornado moved through densely built areas where structural spacing was minimal. When one building failed, debris slammed into adjacent structures, creating cascading collapses. Rescue efforts were complicated by blocked roads and unstable ruins. A total of 203 people were killed. Hundreds were injured. Entire blocks of Gainesville's business district were destroyed beyond repair. The back-to-back impact of Tupelo and Gainesville in the same outbreak remains one of the deadliest consecutive tornado periods in U.S. history. For Gainesville, the disaster reshaped the city's core permanently. Reconstruction took years, and the scars of April 1936 remained visible long after the debris was cleared. Level 6, Tupelo, Mississippi, April 5, 1936. 216 deaths. By April 1936, meteorology had advanced compared to the late 1800s, but tornado warnings were still limited and inconsistent. On the evening of April 5th, a violent tornado struck Tupelo, Mississippi. The storm moved through residential districts, destroying homes across wide swaths of the city. Entire streets were flattened. Some structures were swept completely away. Survivors described intense winds accompanied by heavy rain and darkness, reducing visibility to near zero. The tornado killed 216 people, many of them trapped inside collapsed buildings. Hospitals were damaged, complicating medical response. Emergency workers struggled to navigate debris-filled streets. At the time, tornado forecasting terminology was still restricted. Public communication about tornado threats was cautious, and many communities were not accustomed to receiving urgent warnings. Nighttime conditions added to the danger. As residents had little visual confirmation of the approaching storm, Tupelo's destruction was catastrophic. Hundreds of homes were destroyed. Families were displaced across the city. Relief efforts mobilized regionally, but the scale of devastation required national attention. The tornado left a permanent mark on Tupelo's history. Entire neighborhoods had to be rebuilt from scratch. The fatality count made it one of the deadliest tornadoes of the 20th century up to that point. Level 7, St. Louis, Missouri/East St. Louis, Illinois, May 27, 1896, 255 deaths. On May 27, 1896, one of the most destructive urban tornadoes in American history struck the St. Louis metropolitan area. The tornado formed west of the city and intensified as it moved eastward. When it entered St. Louis, it tore through densely populated neighborhoods, destroying homes, factories, churches, and public buildings. The storm crossed the Mississippi River, striking East St. Louis, Illinois, with equal force. River traffic was overturned. Boats were capsized and destroyed. Industrial structures along the waterfront collapsed. At least 255 people were killed, though some historical accounts suggest the true number may have been slightly higher due to incomplete records from that era. The tornado inflicted catastrophic structural damage. Brick buildings crumbled, wooden homes were obliterated, debris filled the streets, forming massive piles of wreckage. Bridges sustained damage and transportation was paralyzed. Emergency response in 1896 relied on local coordination. Firefighters, police, and volunteers worked through unstable debris fields without modern heavy equipment. Communication was limited to telegraph and word of mouth. The tornado's direct strike on a major metropolitan area amplified its lethality. Population density meant more structures failed simultaneously, and more people were exposed to collapsing buildings. The St. Louis-East St. Louis tornado remains one of the deadliest urban tornadoes ever recorded in the United States. Its destruction demonstrated how violent tornadoes interacting with large cities can produce casualty numbers comparable to other large-scale disasters of the era. Level 8, Natchez, Mississippi, May 7, 1840, 317 deaths. On May 7, 1840, a violent tornado struck Natchez, Mississippi, along the banks of the Mississippi River. It remains one of the deadliest tornadoes ever recorded in the United States. The tornado moved directly into the riverfront district where flatboats and trading vessels were docked or traveling along the waterway. When the storm crossed the river, boats were overturned, shattered, or driven into the banks. Many victims drowned after being thrown into the water. The tornado then tore into parts of Natchez itself. Buildings were destroyed, homes collapsed, and entire sections of the town were leveled. In 1840, construction methods offered little resistance to extreme wind. Most structures were wood-framed and unanchored. When winds intensified, failure was immediate. Official records list 317 fatalities. However, historians have long acknowledged that the true number may have been higher. Record-keeping in the 19th century was inconsistent, and casualties among enslaved individuals and river workers were not always fully documented. There were no warning systems of any kind. Residents relied solely on what they could see. Eyewitness accounts describe a sudden darkening sky, intense winds, and structures collapsing within moments. The tornado's interaction with river traffic magnified its lethality. The Mississippi River, normally a lifeline for trade and travel, became a deadly trap as vessels capsized and debris filled the water. Natchez remains one of the earliest and most lethal tornado disasters in American history, demonstrating the destructive potential of violent tornadoes striking populated riverfront communities. Level 9, The Tri-State Tornado, March 18, 1925, 695 deaths. The deadliest tornado in United States history occurred on March 18, 1925. Known as the Tri-State Tornado, it traveled across southeastern Missouri, southern Illinois, and southwestern Indiana. Official records confirm 695 fatalities, though some historical estimates suggest the number may have been slightly higher. The tornado maintained an exceptionally long track, approximately 219 miles, remaining on the ground for more than 3 hours. It moved at forward speeds estimated to exceed 60 miles per hour at times, reducing the time available for communities to react. The storm struck multiple towns directly, including Murfreesboro, DeSoto, and West Frankfort, Illinois. Entire neighborhoods were obliterated. Schools collapsed while in session. Industrial facilities were destroyed. Homes were swept away. Murfreesboro alone recorded over 200 fatalities. In 1925, there was no organized national tornado warning system. Forecasting tools were limited. The word tornado was often avoided in public weather bulletins. Many residents had little indication of the approaching threat until it was visible. Eyewitness accounts describe a massive dark cloud moving rapidly across the landscape, accompanied by intense winds and debris. Survivors reported buildings collapsing within seconds. The tornado's extraordinary path length and sustained intensity compounded the devastation. Communities across 3 states experienced catastrophic damage in succession. Emergency response efforts were localized and slow due to damaged infrastructure and limited communication. The Tri-State Tornado remains unmatched in U.S. history for confirmed fatalities. Its combination of long duration, extreme intensity, and repeated direct strikes on populated towns produced a death toll that has never been exceeded by a single tornado event in the United States.